Hi everybody, I am Max Gray. Welcome to Metal Planet. Today I'm gonna talk about the soundtrack by Mastodon for the 2010 movie Jonah Hex. This film was directed by Jimmy Hayward and notably starred Josh Brolin, Megan Fox, John Malkovich, and Michael Fassbender. Brent Hines, Mastodon's lead guitarist and co-lead vocalist, also had a small cameo in the film. Jonah Hex is a Western superhero film based on the DC Comics character of the same name. This character appeared in comic book series since the 70s in titles such as All-Star Western, Weird Western Tales, as well as his own series. Jonah Hex is a facially scarred anti-hero who works as a bounty hunter in the Old West, and despite having a poor reputation among the people, he has a code of honor to protect and avenge the innocent. In the film, Jonah Hex is recruited by the United States government. His task is to stop Quentin Turnbull, his arch-nemesis, of unleashing a weapon of mass destruction on the American population. In his adventure, Hex is accompanied by Tallulah Black, a gun-wielding prostitute who happens to be his love interest. Unfortunately, the movie had a poor performance at the box office and was generally negatively received by critics and moviegoers. Being a fan of Jonah Hex, I found that the film was definitely below average but still decent. While having many flaws, the movie Jonah Hex has some redeeming qualities like an honest performance by Brolin in the title role and some cool supernatural elements. The sludge metal / progressive metal band Mastodon was apparently approached to work on the soundtrack for this film by the director himself, who was at the time inspired by their album Blood Mountain while writing the script. As the movie Jonah Hex was produced on a tight budget, the band members agreed to work on the soundtrack for basically nothing, but were initially given creative control over the music. At that time, they were working in tandem with film composer John Powell, who was writing the orchestral music for the film. Having written the majority of their studio albums as concept albums that had cinematic qualities, it was the next logical step for the band Mastodon to work on an actual film score. The band members initially composed and recorded an hour-long first batch of instrumental songs that were described as being really heavy with some intense shredding. Brent Hines notably described this material as some of the best shit he had ever written in his life. However, after this first version of Mastodon's score was recorded, the movie experienced many reshoots and re-editing sessions. John Powell also had to leave the project around that time because he had other commitments and was replaced by Marco Beltrami, another film composer. Beltrami apparently thought that the songs Mastodon worked on were too heavy and not enough subtle for the movie. The combination of those two situations forced the band members to scrap the songs they had previously worked on. Mastodon was forced to start from scratch and rapidly write a new score that better matched the newly recorded scenes as well as Beltrami's new vision for the score. This situation was understandably very frustrating for the band members, who worked hard on creating good music basically for free. Working on the second version of the soundtrack tested the band members' patience. They were also at the time limited by time constraints as Mastodon was in the middle of a world tour. But in the end, the band members managed to record a second version of their soundtrack. It was described as having a more restrained, subtle, and atmospheric musical direction compared to the first version of the soundtrack. This second version was ultimately released shortly after the movie as a digital extended play titled Jonah Hex: Revenge Gets Ugly. Death March, with its dark tone and atmospheric quality, is definitely appropriately titled. Its atmosphere rapidly sets the tone for the movie and the soundtrack, and this composition, with its slow and repetitive doom metal riffs, can be described as a musical Ouroboros that repeats itself over and over again. In Death March, the drums take a backseat to focus the attention of the listener on the guitars. On one hand, I think that this song has a cool atmosphere that fits well with the movie, but on the other hand, I think that being an almost 9-minute song, this composition is too repetitive when you listen to it on its own. Clayton Boys can be divided into two main sections. The first one has an interesting sonority that is created by the interaction of strumming guitar parts with what appears to be a distorted bass sound. In this section you can hear the bass loud and clear, something intriguing considering the fact that the bass is often set at relatively low levels in many metal productions. Unlike the previous song in the extended play, Clayton Boys has a climax that represents the second section of the song. This section has a high intensity with its faster speed and strong guitar riffs. At that point, the music starts to sound like the Mastodon we knew at the time. Indian theme starts with tribal percussions that fit well with the title of the song, and in this composition, the drums are more prominent than in the first two songs in the extended play. Like the end of the previous song, Indian theme also has strong guitar riffs, and their sonority are representative of the sludge metal guitar sound. This track stands well on its own. It could have been included as a nice instrumental in one of Mastodon's proper studio albums. The sound of this song is close to the one that was present on earlier releases by the band like Blood Mountain and Leviathan. In my opinion, this track is the strongest song on the extended play. Train Assault has a psychedelic vibe at the beginning with long reverberating notes played on the guitars. After the introduction, the combination of the guitar riffs and the drum beat give the song a somewhat galloping effect that fits well with a title character that is reputed to travel on horseback. Because there is development and variations throughout the duration of the song, this composition definitely has elements of the progressive metal genre. In addition to hard-hitting drums played by Brian Taylor, the song also contains heavy guitar riffs, but they are not as heavy as the previous song in the extended play. After the songs I just discussed, there is at the end of the record two alternate versions of the extended play's first two songs. In the alternate version of Death March, there is additional lead guitar work compared to the original. At the beginning of the song, the lead guitar has a really strident sound. After that, the lead guitar switched to a more melodic playing style that complements the rhythmic quality of the original song. Those additional layers of guitars definitely add something to the song and make it less repetitive and more interesting. In many ways, I think that makes this version of the song actually better than the original. Like the previous song in the extended play, the alternate version of Clayton Boys also features additional lead guitar work compared to the original. That lead guitar work is intriguing but not phenomenal. It mainly consists of long notes that have a droning characteristic. Because the additions in this version of the song are mostly droning sounds, I do not think that this version is necessarily better than the original, but it presents the listener a different perspective of the song. When the record ends with just 4 original songs, 2 alternate versions, and a length of approximately 33 minutes, you realize that the record could have included more material. How can I describe the music style of this album? It's pretty much what you would have expected at the time of its release. It is the blend of sludge metal and progressive metal Mastodon was known for at the time, but this time with a more atmospheric quality to better suit a movie soundtrack. Some passages and songs in the extended play have a more restrained quality, while other passages and songs are definitely heavier. Some are really heavy, especially for a Hollywood movie soundtrack. There are 2 songs on this album that I recommend the most. They both represent the heavier side of the album. The first one I recommend is Indian Theme. Like I said earlier, I consider this track to be the highlight of the album. What I like the most about this song is the heavy riffing. And it's interesting because it doesn't happen quite often to hear such heavy riffs in a Hollywood movie. The second song I recommend is Train Assault. The galloping effect that is created by the interaction of the guitar riffs with the drum beat contributes to give the song a cool groove. And another thing I like about this song is that it contains a more developed musical progression than other songs in the extended play. I think that none of the songs on this extended play are perfect. Most of them could have been ameliorated one way or another. One song that could have definitely been better is the original version of Death March. It does have a cool atmosphere that fits well with the movie, but being an almost 9-minute song, it is too repetitive for such a long composition. Considering that many music critics and fans of the band didn't think too highly of this album when it was released, what's my personal verdict? Well, what I think about the album pretty much parallels what I think about the movie. Like the movie, I think that the soundtrack is definitely below average but still decent. I give it a score of 6 out of 10. I have to agree that this album was both a disappointment and a missed opportunity at the time, because every studio albums the band released before this extended play were either very good, great, or phenomenal. Every album the band released was more ambitious and had more cinematic qualities than the one before. So when Mastodon finally got the chance to work on an actual film score and released this extended play which was below average, it was kind of anticlimactic. Two elements that make this release below average is the fact that some of the songs are too repetitive and the fact that the record doesn't contain enough material. This repetitiveness was not something that was really necessary, even if we consider that the music is used as a background in the film. The repetitiveness took me by surprise the first time I heard this release, because at the time Mastodon was known for its relatively complex song structures that contain developed musical progressions. In addition, with just 4 original songs and 2 alternate versions, you can't help thinking that this release should have included more material, more meat on the bone, so to speak. One thing that could have been done by the record company would have been to combine Mastodon's metal score with Marco Beltrami's orchestral score to make this release a full length. With all that said, I also think that the soundtrack has some redeeming qualities. 2 elements that contribute to make this soundtrack decent are the good guitar riffs in the heavier songs and the atmospheric vibe in the softer songs. I would recommend this release only to people that are already passionate fans of Mastodon, or to people that are curious about hearing a movie soundtrack scored by a metal band, something really rare, almost inexistent. In the end, I think that Mastodon cannot really be blamed for the below average quality of this release. The situation the band was in at the time definitely had something to do with the final results. It must have been pretty demoralizing for the band members, after having recorded a first version of the soundtrack, to have been forced to record a second version with a limited amount of time left. One thing that would be interesting in the future is that the first batch of songs the band recorded for the soundtrack resurface one way or another in a compilation or a box set. This way we could hear the intense shredding Brett Hines was talking about when he described this material. While the extended play has many flaws and some songs doesn't stand that well on their own when you just listen to the music, it can't be denied that this score works really well as background music for the film, so the band members were at least partially successful with the creation of this score. For people who are not already familiar with Mastodon's music and would like to hear what the band is really capable of, I recommend the albums Blood Mountain and Crack the Sky. Both of these albums are concept albums that have cinematic qualities. Blood Mountain is a heavy album that represents the earth element in the band's discography, and according to Mastodon's bassist Troy Sanders, this album is about what happens if you're lost in the woods while climbing a mountain. What happens there if you're starving, hallucinating, and running into strange creatures while being hunted? The album Crack the Sky is less heavy than Blood Mountain, but it is more ambitious with more complex song structures. This album represents the ether element in the band's discography, and this album has an even weirder story than its predecessor. Crack the Sky details the journey of a paraplegic person who astral travels too close to the sun. He then gets sucked into a wormhole that transports his body into Russia, where a cult put his soul into the body of the mystic Rasputin. The band members must have been really high when they concocted the story for this album, but the end result is an amazing musical experience. To my knowledge, the movie Jonah Hex is to this day the only Western film scored by a metal band, so I can't recommend you a similar album by a different band. But I suggest that you listen to the Ennio Morricone score for the classic Western film The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. This soundtrack is not heavy metal or hard rock by any means, it is more of a traditional orchestral score. In many ways, it is the quintessential Western movie score. It is impossible to talk about the soundtrack of a Western movie without talking about this score. The climax of the soundtrack, the composition named The Ecstasy of Gold, is notably used by Metallica as an introduction to their concerts. They even played a cover of this song live a few times throughout the years. Well, that's it for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to publish another video soon. Thanks a lot. Cheers.